I love this time of the year, starting with Lent, and we get to Holy Week, and then we celebrate Pascha. And the time afterwards, we get to say and greet one another with Christ is risen, Christos Anesti. And we get to exclaim these words. And every single time around this time of the year, I think of this one second grade class that I had at my previous assignment in Fort Lauderdale, Florida at St. Demetrius. And it was a second grade class, and we spent the whole month talking about what's to come. We spoke about the different Sundays in Lent. We spoke about what was happening Holy Week day by day. And so I asked the question to them, what do you think Jesus' first words were to the disciples? And of course, being a second grade class, the kids are a little bit shy, but we had a couple of the kids who were more sociable. So we had this one little girl, her name was Dimitra, and she was like this, waving her hand in the air. She answers all the questions, so I was like, I'm going to try and see if there's anyone else. I started calling people, they're like, Father, I don't know, Father, I don't know. Here she is, waving both her arms at this time. She's like, Father, Father, me. And I'm like, okay, Dimitra, tell me, what did Jesus say to his disciples? And she gets up out of her seat. I'm trying to make this as theatrical as possible. She gets out of her seat, and she jumps in the air. Ta-da! And I died laughing. I didn't know what to do. I was like, we lost it. We've lost the second grade Sunday school class. That's it. However, being the person that I am, I ran with it. Even after everything settled down, I shared with them that she was right. This was a ta-da moment. Christ had conquered death. He granted us everlasting life. And that glorious power, that victory, needed to be shared with everyone in the world. Appearing to the disciples, Dimitra, was a ta-da moment. But the real words that were said were, peace be with you. When he came and he said this, he showed them his hands and his side, and the disciples rejoiced in what they saw. And in today's gospel, we heard that there was one of the disciples who were not present when Christ came. So the disciples had told him, we have seen the Lord. But Thomas said to them, unless I see in his hands the print of the nails, and place my finger in the marks that they have made, and place my hand in his side, I will not believe. I want all of us today to think of what it would actually like to be Thomas. What would possibly be going through his mind when the other disciples came to him and said, we have seen Jesus? A recent study I'm going to share with you by the Pew Forum on Religious and Public Life conducted a survey that discovered amongst Roman Catholics, Protestants, and Orthodox Christians, we're all included in this study, 25%, 1 out of every 4 church-going members at one point in their life had a doubt. They had a doubt about the existence of God. They had a doubt about what their church was really doing, whatever it is, they had doubted. Remember, church-going members. Now, the reason why I bring this statistic up is because, to us, it's almost illogical to think that people who can come to church multiple times, not just on Christmas and Easter, but multiple times throughout the year, who are steadfast in the faith, at one point in their life had doubted. But we have to be real with ourselves. Doubts exist because, like Thomas, people need to see to believe. We need that proof that exists. We need to understand, however, though, that the people who don't need that proof are faithful, but the people who need the proof are still faithful. Just because they doubt doesn't make them any less faithful of a person. We hear about this blind faith, this concept of blind faith versus visual faith. And we hear about blind faith in today's gospel reading when Jesus says, "Blessed are those who have not seen, that believe." Blind faith, for those of us who have it at least, will not change. Because it's not based on evidence, reason, logic, the things of the world. Their faith is in the phrase that we have in Greek, echio theos, meaning that God will provide. And this is usually said when there's some type of void in our life that whatever it might be, we blindly just leave it to God. And if it's God's will for our life, God will provide it. So the person that has that science mentality, the logic, the mathematics, the reason, it's hard for them to understand this blind faith. But eventually, they will. A person with blind faith has that deeper relationship with God. And this relationship defines their life. In today's gospel, we also heard visual faith. Thomas was one of the apostles, and he listened to all of Jesus' teachings. He was there for them. He witnessed them. He was willing to even enter Jerusalem with Christ. And even though he gets this bad rap of being doubting Thomas, the one who didn't believe, we have, in a relatable fashion, a person who questions and doubts when the other disciples even came to him. He, being a committed follower of Christ, we still have somebody who's relatable to us. He is somebody who needed to see to believe. And what happens when eventually he sees Jesus? Christ shows mercy upon him. He shows Thomas what he needs to see. He shows him the marks. He shows him the scars. He shows him what he needs to see to believe. And at that point, we see almost the crossing of a threshold. We see a man who had that visual faith, that smaller essence, but still faithful, turn into a man who has blind faith. As we hear, and I've pinpointed that time being when Thomas proclaims, "My Lord and my God." With that in mind, I want to share with you all a section of a homily from St. Gregory the Great, because it solidifies what I'm talking about today, this visual faith having a pathway to blind faith. It was not an accident that a particular disciple was not present. The divine mercy ordained that a doubting disciple should, by feeling in his master's wounds of the flesh, heal in us the wounds of his unbelief. Now this is the good part here. The unbelief of Thomas is more profitable to our faith than the belief of the other disciples. For the touch by which he is brought to believe confirms our minds in belief beyond all question. Earlier on in the sermon, I asked, what would it be like to be Thomas? Let's put ourselves in his shoes. And as I was thinking throughout the week, we almost have that same situation. So I'm going to make and present that situation. After Holy Week and Pascha, a full week of visual opportunity from the Nifio service, from the Holy Thursday where we crucify Christ to Good Friday where we walk around the church. We have that visual opportunity. I stand before you with a message. Christ has resurrected from the dead, trampling down death by death and granting life to those in the tombs. He showed himself to the disciples. He showed the scars of suffering to Thomas. And Thomas himself has no doubts. Now, it's our turn. Do we believe? Do we have the visual faith needed to cross that threshold into that blind faith where we can truthfully leave everything to God? This is the message today's gospel brings. And we have to think about it in this way. And I pray as we grow and we grow and we grow, that we transition from that visual faith to the blind faith. Amen.